Our next guest is a progressive running for Congress in Pennsylvania's 3rd District, and she's doing it without the help of corporate donors. Alexandra Hunt is mounting a grassroots primary challenge against Democrat Dwight Evans and demanding, quote, radical change through policies like universal health care.
We need a representative who stands by the needs of the people and champions real change. My opponent campaigned on universal health care, yet failed to vote for Medicare for all. He played a key role in the shifting landscape of education in Philadelphia, setting up charter schools that took voice away from educators and parents and led to further segregation within our school system. He has a history of voting on behalf of his corporate donors funding his campaign, but we need a representative who cannot be bought and works only to serve the needs of our people. We need to reinvest in education and give power back to teachers and parents, provide universal childcare, support the Green New Deal, increase the minimum wage, pass Medicare for all, and fight for criminal justice reform.
Alexandra Hunt joins us now to take us inside her campaign. Welcome to Rising.
Hi, thank you for having me. We've come so long since the launching of that video. It's fun to look back.
Yeah, well, you've been exploring this for an awfully long time. I think you and I were in touch. How long ago when you first started looking at this race?
Well, first started looking probably a year and a half ago, and then we launched last February, so a little over a year.
I mean, so how is the race going so far?
Well, it's definitely starting to pick up, and that has been exciting. And it's also led to an increase in intimidation tactics and threats as well. That's what happens when you run against the establishment. But we have brought in a ton of grassroots support, a ton of volunteers from all over our country, actually globally, honestly. And our story has really been reaching people from all corners of the world, and that's been really exciting to be a part of.
So what is the big difference, you would say, between you and Dwight Evans? So is this the person, so you're primarying Dwight Evans, is that right? And
yes,
so what would you say are the biggest differences and why voters would choose you over going with the same old, same old?
Well, my opponent can be quoted for saying that he does vote and move on behalf of his corporate donors. He's number 37 in the Democratic Party for how much corporate dark money he takes. Wow. And over 53% of his campaign is funded by dark money. And whereas 100% of ours is funded by grassroots donors. And the purpose of that is so that we only answer to the people. And we're proving that on the campaign trail. And that's exactly how we'll move in Congress. I am running on a platform that has some pretty key distinctions, especially in healthcare. As you saw from our launch video, he ran on universal healthcare. I voted for him because of that. And then once he got into office, he took private health insurance money, backed out of the Medicare for All caucus, and will not support Medicare for All. In a pandemic, we can't have that. He has also championed charter schools. And while he served in the State House, he defunded our public education, and nowadays our schools are really struggling to get by. We have a teacher shortage, our buildings are falling apart, and that really hurts our students and our children. And another big distinction is in our criminal justice reform platform. I'm pushing for restorative justice and for rehabilitation. He's pushing for broken windows policing and tough on crime.
On the education front, families have been really hurting. Obviously, the education system was one of the most frustrating aspects of the pandemic. Schools being closed so long, masks being required on kids. In DC, they're still required, actually, when nobody else has to wear them still. So I think the public school system, there was a lot of failure. It wasn't for lack of money. It was for lack of will to really serve families when they needed it. So what is your approach? Obviously, the pandemic's winding down, but there's so much frustration among families with what went on in the schools. So how are you going to rebuild? Is it an issue of rebuilding trust in the education system, or do you think it's really just an issue of financial resources?
Well, I don't think that we can say it's rebuilding trust. I think we have to invest into education and build trust from the ground up. I don't think that it was there before. And so, yes, absolutely, we need financial resources, but financial resources can open doors like lowering classroom size and increasing the salary of educators and other staff at schools. And that can lead to people being able to hold these jobs. And what we're seeing in Philadelphia is an extreme lack of funding. And that does lead to a lack of trust from families and frustration, but we're also under resourced. And that resources are finances, but they're also staff, they're also materials, they're also safe buildings, and we're lacking all of those.
So you mentioned that there were a lot of attacks against you, and one that I've just got to bring up. This is just outrageous. So People Magazine, you've actually been pretty open about your past as a dancer, and People Magazine ran the story saying, quote, former stripper running for Congress writes about losing a job and sex work stigma. I mean, how did you feel about this piece being run? Were you in favor of this? Was this something that you were like, okay, let's do this? I guess let's talk about it openly. Or was this something that was like an attack lobbed against you?
I don't think it was intended to be an attack, but it's definitely not something that they reached out to us about. We found it randomly. And
wow.
Yeah. So that was part of it. Also, some of the information where they talk about the race is incorrect. And if they had simply started a conversation with myself, I could have easily clarified that I'm running against Dwight Evans in a primary. And then on top of that, the headline is just dehumanizing. And I think that we need to talk about how media can play a role in dehumanizing those of us with stories. And that's what I tried to point out when I called them out for it, that I have a name, I'm a person. Yes, this is one of my experiences, but it's not all of my experiences. And you can come talk to me about it if you want information before you run a story.
Well, I mean, if you were editing the headline, what would you have suggested to them? I mean, you have led with that experience, and I think rightfully so. It's something that distinguishes you. It's something that's given you insight into a marginalized community that can then be marshaled to the benefit of the entire district. So, how would you have suggested that they frame that in a more sensitive way?
They could have used my name. And the argument has been that I'm not well known enough to use my name, but that's, again, going into the dehumanization of everyday people. Is we don't have to be well known to have names and to have stories and to be human beings and to be respected as such.
Yeah, I feel called out there because we always have these debates and with the copy editors and with the headline writers. Let me know if you do too.
It's a real thing.
Like, has anybody heard of this person? And it'll usually be it's usually a member of Congress, actually, where I'll say Jerry Nadler will be in the headline.
Right.
And we'll have a copy editor be like, who's Jerry Nadler? I'm like, possibly your congressional representative, actually. and they'll say, well, do you have enough people heard of Jerry Nadler? And then somebody will say, well, put Jerry Nadler in the SEO.
And I, of course, actively want to dehumanize members of Congress.
That's true.
Not
those NPCs.
No offense to the office.
Once you're in, then you'll be dehumanized.
Not a big fan of
Robbie.
the government personally.
Yeah. I mean, they definitely could have rewritten this headline to be less dehumanized. I mean, just to start with former stripper, right? Rather than saying woman running for Congress, talks about her past as working as a former stripper. They could have framed it to where they led with her being a human being rather than former stripper. And they also probably shouldn't have stuck sex work stigma in the headline. That just right there, again, is meant to entice.
I bet whoever wrote it thought they were being woke. Like I thought they were like, because they talked about stigma and sex work. I don't know. What response did you get from them?
They have reached out, and I think they are working on putting something together in the form of an apology. Yeah. But to your point of woman running for Congress, another headline that I criticized was trauma survivor to challenge Dwight Evans. And it's then taking some of my experiences and leading with those instead of my name and the fact that I'm a human being who survived those experiences.
Yeah.
So I think that it's important to use our names.
And
well, and they should have just talked to you.
Challenges trauma inflictor, a member of the government.
There you go.
Yeah, maybe.
That's how I
there you
would
go.
fix it.
Like
Yeah.
flip it on the other guy. Right. Yeah,
Oh.
and I mean, in the minimum, they should have absolutely had a conversation with you. So that's why it does feel like maybe this was some sort of a concerted effort to make, maybe one of your opponent or the establishment was trying to lob this attack on you, but People Magazine trying to soften it a bit. Like, well, we can't like just flat out come out and say, oh, look, this stripper's running for Congress. Like, who does she think she is? Instead, they're like, well, okay, let's make it seem like it's relevant to the post-Me Too world, while also giving making everybody question. It just seems like they could have done this a lot differently.
I agree, and I think they're working to remedy it, but and
it's always too late. Who reads apologies? Give me a break. Nobody.
Well, I'm hoping that it still is clickbaity enough that people will click on it and learn about just the stigma that surrounds sex work and how media and a headline like that can contribute to it.
Right, totally.
And the not reaching out is and the not reaching out is also a journalism industry thing now. There are entire armies of people whose job it is just aggregate.
Yeah.
I bet that person is, I don't know who wrote the piece, but I would say that thousands of journalists out there don't ever make phone calls because their job is just to take things that have been published elsewhere, put a new headline on it.
Maybe there's an email sitting in your spam box that you received 4 minutes before the piece.
No, these aggregators don't even do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
No,
As a former HuffPost writer.
Well, Alexandra, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me and for inviting me on to talk about it.
Thank you. We appreciate you joining us so much. We'll be back with more Rising right after this.